Who makes the Vancouver Canucks for 2019-2020? This is a big can of worms, and there is a big list of players who could make the team, should make the team, and deserve to make the team. Overall, there's a lot of different labels that you can put on most everybody that's in the Utica Comets system or in any of the other systems worldwide under Vancouver Canucks property. I made this kind of video last year, talked about some of the guys, Pettersson, how he wasn't necessarily guaranteed because not everybody saw that he was as physically mature as he could have been. I talked about guys like Dahlin, I talked about guys like Lind and Gadjevich and Juolevi, and nowadays, aside from Quinn Hughes, there isn't really a prospect that I can look at and say with a guaranteed hell yeah, he's gonna make the team next year. There are a few guys that the Vancouver Canucks brought in most recently, like Vasily Podkolzin, Niels Hoglander, Ethan Keppen, but for the sake of argument, let's just say that none of them are going to make the Canucks next season. Hoglander, maybe towards the end he might have a shot, but for the sake of argument, let's just leave it as 2019 exempt, so no most recently drafted prospects. Let's go through the Vancouver Canucks and their depth chart just to take a look at the profiles of the guys that we have here, because there are a lot of different players and there are a lot of things that you can say about these players. So let's go over through the center core here on Elite Prospects. Horvat, Sutter, Beagle, Pettersson, Schaller, Gaudette. These are all NHL established players, so let's leave them out of the conversation for now. As for Madden, Carlson, Folk, Kosmar, and Zhukanov, none of them are signed, so let's not talk about them either. Tyler Graovac is the only name on here that we can discuss. He's a player most recently signed by the Vancouver Canucks in free agency. He's been mostly an AHL, NHL tweener. He played a little bit with Minnesota and Washington throughout the past few years, but most recently finished up with Calgary's AHL team. For the most part, I see Graovac mostly as an AHL guy. He could maybe challenge for an NHL spot in a bottom six role, but his NHL track record in the past and his overall statistical profile, it mostly screams to me AHL Utica Comets depth, so I wouldn't necessarily say yes to Tyler Graovac. Moving over onto the left wings in the system, Miller, Pearson, Levo, Roussel, Berchi, Mott, these are NHL caliber players. Reed Boucher is next on the list, and I'm not necessarily too sure if he makes the NHL. He's got some really good offensive tools. The shot is NHL caliber, it's so good. But his overall skating ability and defensive zone pressure has held him back from really being an NHL talent in the past. So I'm not necessarily too sure if he's the guy who steps up into a full-time NHL role next season. I'd be very delighted to, because he's had some pretty good goals in the past with some really good snipes, but I don't necessarily see it. As for the next guy here on the signed list on left wings, Francis Perron is a guy who, honestly, has a shot to make the team. He was acquired by the Vancouver Canucks via trade earlier in the draft, and he's a guy who posted 47 points in 63 AHL games last season. That's not bad, and as a 23-year-old guy who looks like he's ready to take the next step potentially, I could realistically see Francis Perron challenging for a spot in the top 9, top 12 maybe, and maybe getting some power play looks here and there because he does look to be a pretty solid offensive threat. He was really good with the QMJHL's Huskies a few years ago, and his AHL numbers don't lie. This is a guy that the Vancouver Canucks acquired in a trade that involved a few draft picks, and of course Tom Pyatt as well. So if Perron is able to find himself onto the club next season, I'd be pretty happy about that. I wouldn't be surprised per se, I wouldn't necessarily expect him to, but it would be very welcomed in my opinion. Going over onto the next left wing here, we have Jonah Gage. He had a pretty rough year last year. I don't think he's going to make the NHL. He'll need to have a few more development and years in the AHL to marinate before fully graduating, but I believe Gadjevich has a few NHL projectable-like qualities. He'll make the team eventually, but I don't think it's next season. As for the rest of the guys, Nikolai Goldolbin is here as an unsigned RFA. I think he makes the team if he's signed. Hoglander, Keppen, McDonough, they're 2019 draft picks, so I'm not going to talk about them in this context. Going over into right wingers, we have ourselves Justin Bailey, who was signed by the Vancouver Canucks via offseason. He's actually played a lot in the NHL over the past few years, 63 total games played, spread across the Sabres and the Flyers. However, he's mostly been an AHL guy as of late, 37 games played with the Rochester Americans last season and 20 points, and 17 games played with the Lehigh Valley Phantoms and 8 points. So, in my opinion, Bailey, as a big 6'4", 24-year-old right winger, projects more as a top-line AHL guy rather than a bottom-6 NHL full-time guy. But, you know, if the jump is made, then the jump is made. I wouldn't be surprised if Bailey fought his way onto the team and stayed full-time, but I would probably put him in the AHL, see how he meshes with Utica first. So I don't necessarily know if he makes the team right away, but I wouldn't be surprised. Going over into our other right wingers here on the list, we have ourselves Zach McEwen, who has played in the NHL before and has been a legitimate Utica Comets beast. I think if the jump is ready to be made for McEwen, it's gonna be made now. Now, the Vancouver Canucks do have a lot of forwards, and they are in a weird position in terms of their depth, but if this team was in a position where McEwen would have a spot, I think he's on it full time. He's shown that he can actually compete at the NHL level with that big frame of his and that nice scoring touch, so I'd really like to see McEwen make the team. I wouldn't be surprised if he did, but just the way that we're made up now on forwards, I would not really be surprised if he started out in the AHL either. As for Lukas Jasek, Cole Lind, and Petrus Palmu, these three all started out in the AHL last season. Palmu went back over to Finland. Lukas Jasek was really good, but I think in order for him to really develop into an NHL player, he's going to need one more year of really good primetime AHL experience, because he had a great season last year as a Utica Comets rookie. Cole Lind didn't have a great season, so he needs to bounce back. And Petrus Palmu, well, he went back to Finland. He's going to really need to find his game in other ways if he wants to become a Vancouver Canuck. Then, on the sides, we have Besser. He's going to come back. No questions asked. Podkolzin, Lockwood, Manukian, Plasik, and Malone. Nah, we're not going to talk about those guys either. Now, going over into defense. This is where things get interesting. Edler, Myers, Tanev, Stetcher, Hughes, yes. I didn't even need to talk about Hughes in this context. We all know Hughes is making the team. Jordie Benn, yes. Fantenberg, I guess so. As for Alex Biega, I believe that he's still going to be in that limbo where he's a pretty good AHL guy, but when we have injuries, he's going to be one of the first to get called up. But then things get interesting. We have a big pool of Juolevi, Sautner, Brisebois, Tevez, and Rafferty. These guys are all players who could potentially challenge for injury call-up spots on the team, but I'm not necessarily too sure if any of these guys have legitimate 82-game pace upside at this point. And that's mostly just due to inexperience, overall lack of exposure to the NHL, and don't get me wrong, I don't mean that in a very negligent kind of way. Sautner has played 22 NHL games so far, which is great. Brisebois has played 8. Those two guys have played mostly in a call-up kind of role. Tevez and Rafferty have played a few games each, but those were at the very end of last season, and Juolevi, he hasn't played hockey in a year, period. So, out of these guys, I think they all have the potential to eventually get up to the team once in a while. I doubt any of them start on the team, but the one with the biggest upside to possibly ending the season with the team, I believe, is Olli Juolevi. He's got a ton of potential still, and he hasn't played hockey in such a long time because of injury, but he was on track to being a pretty solid player a year ago that he has to prove starting out, coming back onto the ice, that he still has that potential. And if he's able to do that, I believe by the time April comes around, March, maybe even February, he's a full-time NHLer with the Vancouver Canucks. Maybe he pushes out Fantenberg or Benn or whatever, but I believe Juolevi will be given all the opportunities in the world to succeed, and getting called up once in a while for injury, I think is going to be a really big blessing and a huge step forward for Olli Juolevi. As for the other guys, as I said, injury call-ups, I'm pretty sure Rafferty, Tevez, Sautner, and Brisebois will get their fair share of games. I'm not necessarily too sure if any of them have 82-game upside, but you never know. Things could definitely exceed my expectations. The final pool of players we have on D is Jarlin Chatfield, Mitch Elliott, Jet Wu, Rathbone, Utunen, and Troyamkin. I think these guys are all going to be set in place with their minor teams, if not the AHL, so it'll be great to see them develop there. As for goaltenders, Markstrom and Demko, yes, it's our 1-2 punch, but we no longer need to rely on DiPietro to play our games when both of our goalies are injured. We have Zane McIntyre signed via free agency. He'll most likely be the AHL guy this year, but he will get the few call-ups once in a while because the AHL still has guys like Bachman and Kiley and DiPietro, I guess. He's eligible to go, right? But for the most part, Zane McIntyre is our new backup, just in case Markstrom and Demko are both out, so we don't have to take our OHL guy and put him into the NHL. So McIntyre will probably get a few games here and there because, you know, we get injured. It's whatever. But for the rest of the guys, Matthew Thiessen and Arthur Seelovs, it'll be awesome to watch them go into their minor teams as well. Seelovs in the OHL, and Thiessen, I believe he's going to go to college, so that's going to be really good for him. The University of Maine, I believe. So overall, that's my in-depth analysis of who makes the team, who's going to be on the team eventually, who could challenge for spots, and overall players that I think you should keep an eye on. Juolevi, Francis Perron, these are two guys that I think really have legitimate shots into being impact players down the line, but there are some other guys that could make the team, step in once in a while like Zane McIntyre, Ashton Sautner, maybe a guy like Justin Bailey, so it's not as exciting as last year, I think, because last year we could talk about guys like, Lind and Gadjevich, and entertain that idea, but nah, not this year. They've shown that they need some time in the AHL. So I hope you enjoyed this video, Social 99, and bye.